Hi there, it's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back to your weekly Aquatic Industry Insider. In today's video, we're going to talk about the new patent filing for the Apple Watch and what this means for water safety. This announcement came earlier this week on April 2nd, 2024. Before we jump into the patent filing itself, I do want to comment on my background and what qualifies to make these comments on this new development in terms of products. So I've been a lifeguard for 20 years here in Canada. I'm also a national lifeguard instructor, so I teach national lifeguard courses. I also am a national lifeguard instructor trainer. My opinions do not represent the Life Saving Society or the National Lifeguard Program, but I have spent thousands of hours on deck lifeguarding different types of events, different pools, different types of swims. I'm also a swimming instructor. And then in more recent years, I have been involved with committee work that is working towards drowning detection technology systems. I do have a different video posted regarding the first documented or publicly correlated death associated with a pool that had adopted commercial drowning technology systems. You can have a look at that video if you want to understand more about my concerns with the widespread adoption of this technology, if it is not part of a layer of protection for a pool that still includes lifeguards. But in this video, I want to talk about the consumer side of drowning and water safety. So this might be a bit of a restatement from that other video, but the two committees that I currently sit on are the ASTM Residential Drowning Technology Committee. We are working towards creating a product standard and a testing standard to verify drowning technology systems that would be installed on residential backyard pools. This is a committee I joined when it was newly formed in 2020 because I feel strongly that there has been a large proliferation of drowning technology systems for the market, for the lay consumer, moms and dads, grandparents who are going online and looking for these systems, whether it is a bracelet, whether it is a wristband, whether it is a headband, whether it is some sort of sensor attached to a child's clothing. There is a huge demand for water safety and drowning prevention in the consumer industry. That committee is looking at permanent installation of infrastructure. So this Apple Watch innovation would not qualify. But based on my work on that committee over the last 4 years, I do feel qualified to speak a little bit on this Apple patent filing. The other committee that I'm a part of is the ISO committee, the International Standards Organization. I sit on the Canadian Mirror Committee. So each country internationally has a mirror committee. It's a part of SCC Canada, the Standards Council of Canada. And actually, I will be going to Bern, Switzerland in about 10 days to participate in that ISO meeting regarding commercial drowning technology systems. So whether you feel I'm qualified to speak on these topics or not, I do have opinions based on that committee work, based on lifeguard work, based also on what I'm seeing in terms of products that are coming out on the market, that are advertised across social media, and that play into the average parent's fear of their child drowning in different conditions. Now, a patent filing doesn't mean that the product will be successfully developed, will be offered to the consumer, but it does mean that there has been an interest in looking at these items. So these are all news articles from the internet, but I've gotten into the habit now of using Print Friendly to print them as a PDF because all of these websites have so many ads on them. It's much easier for me to show you a news article via a PDF, but I will link to all of these news articles below. So this is the first news article that I looked at based on the initial Google News alert. This is from quartz.com. Apple seeks patent for Apple Watch swimming lifeguard feature. A new patent for an Apple Watch feature could warn people about going to the deep end of the pool. From its heart rate monitors to its car crash detection, the Apple Watch has a multitude of features that have helped save lives. Now, Apple wants to add another feature to the smartwatch that can warn you about going to the deep end of the pool. The feature, referred to as Digital Pool Attendant, in the patent paperwork first spotted by 9 to 5 Mac on Tuesday, April 2nd, would detect irregular swimming behavior, which could mean a person is drowning. This warning could then be relayed to family members on their Apple Watch or sent to a drowning detection system at a pool to notify lifeguards. If a person is not much of a swimmer, the watch could also give a warning when they're going into the deep end of the pool. This feature works by using the different sensors in the Apple Watch, such as the accelerometer, gyroscope, GPS, and heart rate monitor. It would be able to determine swim strokes and motion while swimming, as well as figure out where your heart rate should be when swimming normally and not swimming. The Apple Watch would also be able to determine when the data from the sensors is totally off, meaning a person could be in distress. Apple did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the feature. This feature is just a patent, and it's unclear when this could be available or how this could work. So I want to comment first on some of the claims made in this article. I don't want to make the journalist responsible for what Apple is doing. I really hope here that a lay journalist with not a lot of experience with water safety and drowning prevention. To start out, the idea of a digital pool attendant, I don't think is necessarily a bad idea. I think where it becomes very tricky is how do we detect irregular swimming behavior? That is something that is very hard to standardize. Everybody has a different swimming stroke, a different swimming behavior, the same way two different people have different running strides. The next piece where this could be relayed to family members on Apple Watch, I think that's a great idea. You could certainly set up a feature like this within a household, within a family unit, and have your children or have your spouse connected to their wearable devices, whether it's an Apple Watch, to receive notification when the watch gets wet or when the watch is submerged in water. I don't think that's inherently a bad feature. Where I think it gets very muddy is sending this to a drowning detection system at a pool to notify lifeguards. That is a huge increase in scope. That is very concerning in terms of a commercial pool setting is quite a different application from a residential pool setting. And so if we take this down the road a little bit, and I'm a lifeguard at a community center pool, and there are all kinds of Apple Watches randomly pinging to some sort of network or receiving platform, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Certainly, we can set up some parameters down the road for something like this to make sense. But just to hook into a network or hook into technology, it's very difficult to specify the swimming behavior as well as the environmental conditions. So what an older person is doing in terms of jogging in the shallow end during aquatic fitness is very different from a competitive swimmer who's 22 years old, swimming a set, swimming laps. It's just a huge challenge. It's a huge range of activities, a huge range of body types, a huge range of pools and water conditions. This is exactly the kind of criteria that we are struggling with within the two different committees that I belong to, because drowning, the definition of drowning in terms of submersion, fatal versus non-fatal, is a huge, huge scope of a problem. The next piece, this is where I truly hope that the journalist is overstating or creating an article where we don't know Apple's intent. If a person is not much of a swimmer, the watch could also give a warning when they're going into the deep end of the pool. That's just bizarre to me. Why do we need to know that they're going into the deep end of the pool? The deep end of the pool is not inherently more dangerous unless the person is a non-swimmer, unless it's a child or a shorter person. I'm just not sure why that would be helpful. And then it talks about how the watch would be able to do this based on the technology and the infrastructure in the device. It then goes on in this article to state that the watch would be able to determine the swim strokes and the motion while swimming. I think that's possible to do, but as I mentioned earlier, there needs to be an improvement in the quality of that measuring, because I know certainly with just my Fitbit, there have been difficulties measuring distance if I'm not doing a forward moving stroke. Front crawl is effectively measured when I have swum it, but not a vertical egg beater or not a simple flutter kick with a kickboard. My device really had difficulty measuring those effectively. The Apple Watch would also be able to determine when the data from the sensors is totally off. So off as in a dead battery, off as in wrong, off as in submerged in water. I think that's very imprecise. So this is the first article I read. It didn't have a lot of detail. That's what made it very concerning. The next day, poolmagazine.com did feature the announcement of this feature. Poolmagazine.com does a really great job at highlighting pretty quickly some issues or news articles that occur in our industry. So let's have a look at this particular article. It did not have a lot of new information. It basically restated that a forthcoming feature potentially destined for the Apple Watch, as detailed in a recent patent filing, could serve as a lifesaver for swimmers at risk of drowning. Outlined in the patent is a capability for the watch to identify irregular behavior. I really appreciate that this journalist put that in air quotes, because irregular behavior, as I've mentioned, is quite varied, and it would be very difficult to determine what is irregular behavior in a way that is going to, quote, save people, but then also not set off alerts and notifications when there's nothing to be concerned about. One of the things we found in our committee work is that we want to cast a broad net that encapsulates a lot of different types of drowning behaviors, but we also need the technology to work with set definitions, because if there's no set definitions, it makes it difficult to create a testing standard for the product and the technology. And also we need to try and prevent false alerts or false notifications, because if something doesn't work well, the consumer will either turn it off or become sort of blind or deaf to the notifications. They'll tune them out when it's not working. So in the patent filing, Apple underscored the alarming statistics surrounding drowning, particularly its prevalence among children. I agree, drowning is a leading cause of death, especially young children. How many children, though, have an Apple Watch? I think that's really interesting to consider. If this is a function that is intended primarily for children, will the children need their own Apple devices, their own Apple Watches, or will this be a feature connected to AirTags or other sensors that can be worn, other wearable devices? We talk about the chain of survival in water safety and drowning prevention. Early intervention, early CPR, early resuscitation will increase positive outcomes. So the longer the brain is starved of oxygen, the harder it is to recover from that trauma and not experience morbidity. Emphasizing the critical importance of swift intervention during water emergencies, Apple highlights the dire consequences of prolonged submersion without resuscitation, which can result in brain damage and ultimately drowning. Fatal drowning is, I think, what this journalist means. Drowning is the submersion in water, which is already mentioned in this sentence. Fatal drowning, or dying as a consequence of that submersion, is still drowning, whether you die or not. Acknowledging existing underwater camera systems in some swimming pools aimed at detecting distressed swimmers and alerting lifeguards, Apple notes their costliness and unreliability. So this is interesting. This is a direct jab at some of the existing product standards for pool entry alarms. There is already an ASTM standard for residential pool entry alarms. And that is also why there is currently work at the ASTM level and other groups probably when it comes to drowning technology. There is not currently a published standard or testing criteria. This project has been in progress for 4 years. We have not reached a point where there is a agreed upon standard or testing standard. Costliness, I mean, it's difficult to talk about cost when we're talking about someone's life. So certainly a commercial pool drowning detection system, which might cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, that is a substantial cost. The residential drowning technology systems that I am aware of currently on the market that are represented by different manufacturers at our ASTM committee run anywhere from, $400 US to a couple $1,000s. They're not cheap, but I would also argue an Apple Watch is not cheap either. And there is no cost when it comes to safety. Is there a cost to your life? No, there's a cost to preventing somebody's death. So Apple argues that there is a pressing need for a simpler, more cost-effective drowning prevention solution, suitable for all types of water bodies, including public and private pools, as well as natural settings like lakes and ponds, where installing underwater cameras is impractical. So this is where it gets a bit problematic. A lot of these systems that I've mentioned are not for use in beach settings or lakes. Those are quite different environmental conditions, whether there are surf patterns, rip curls, zero depth entry, beach, graduated entry, rocks, waves, different lighting conditions from dawn to dusk, from summer to winter. There is not the ability currently with the same technology to do a beach as a residential pool, as a commercial pool. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not technology systems and manufacturers working on this problem. There are a number of producers that are setting up sensors and zones on beaches around the world, whether it is in Canada, whether it is in Israel, whether it is in Australia. People are attempting these new systems. People are trialing these new systems when it comes to drones and sensors on elevated poles that look like lifeguard stands. It's not that it can't be done, but I have real concerns with a product or a manufacturer such as Apple saying that we can come up with one solution on our wrist for all water bodies, all types of people, all types of swimming. Speaking as a pool operator, the clear water in your swimming pool inside in a commercial facility is going to look quite different from the color, the clarity, the turbidity of a lake or an ocean or a pond. And that is one of the very considerations we've had in committee work. We want to make sure this technology works in water that is not perfectly clear. We want to have water with a minimum cloudiness, as though the pool is poorly maintained, or as though it doesn't have the right water chemistry, or as though it's cloudy from shade like trees overhead or a rainy day. We don't want to create technology that only works in the clearest of water, because that's not realistic for what the average homeowner or even commercial pool operator is able to achieve. But that is harder for some systems to work. That has come up in a lot of conversations. And so to say that a sensor is going to work in all of these conditions is a very broad net, a very high standard to create. It would be amazing if the technology, the AI, what have you, exists to do this. I'm not aware currently in 2024 with the existing products that are on the market and in development that anybody can do this in all water bodies. We want to set clear parameters. So then it goes on to discuss, for instance, if the watch detects a wearer who is not proficient in swimming entering deeper water, it can promptly dispatch an alert. We are going to need more information. This is a great idea in principle. I'm not sure practically how you are going to do this. These alerts can be transmitted to nearby devices, including those of friends and family. I think that's a great idea to start with. I'm a little bit more concerned with the idea that they can seamlessly integrate with existing drowning detection and alarm systems to ensure lifeguards are promptly notified. As I said earlier, I don't know how that would work in the average community center pool, to say nothing of the fact that to have a swimmer go to a local community pool with the expectation that the lifeguards are somehow going to magically know that their Apple Watch is signaling in distress is a whole other layer of concern that I would have as a lifeguard instructor trainer. We can't expect all people to have all technologies at all pools with all training expectations. So I don't want to appear like a negative Nancy in this video. If they can do it, great. I would support something that can reduce drowning fatalities, but I'm not sure at this stage. They have cast a very large net. And in my very basic understanding of patents, I'm not a lawyer, you do need to patent something specific, a specific technology, a specific outcome, a specific need or problem that you're solving. And to solve drowning is a great, valid, noble cause, but they, I hope, are working with water safety professionals to address the fact that this is a very lofty goal, but there's a lot of practical considerations that are not reflected in either of these accounts of what Apple is going to be doing. At this point, Pool Magazine referenced Tech Times. I have the Tech Times article here up on the screen, and it doesn't state anything that we haven't already heard in the other articles that I've shown you from Pool Magazine, from Quartz, from Gizmodo. What I did appreciate, though, about this article is that this writer did mention, so Joseph Henry in Tech Times, he did cite another website that has more details about the patent filing. So this article is the most helpful of all of them, and probably I should have started this whole video with this initial article. This comes from a website called patentlyapple.com. It's a website that follows Apple, the manufacturer, in terms of new products and releases. This is by far the most detailed accounting of the patent. I have not looked up the patent filing itself. Patently Apple has taken the time to look at this patent filing, and we can see some helpful photos in this particular article that they have watermarked. We see, starting here at the top of the article, I've screenshotted it as a PDF, that they are talking about a transmission of SOS, right? Calling for help. I find it interesting from this first picture on the screen, the body position of this swimmer, because I initially thought this swimmer was doing back crawl. This swimmer has a bathing cap and goggles on. They have an athletic style of bathing suit, jammers. They appeared to me to be doing back crawl. So why would they need an SOS transmission? And so as a layperson who is not involved in technology and product development, but as a lifeguard, I would start by saying that this is not a realistic body position for a drowning person. A lot of drowning victims are vertical. This does play into the old-fashioned stereotype that drowning people are just unconscious on the bottom of the pool. And so I really hope that Apple is working with water safety professionals or experienced lifeguards to inform them about some of the issues with this type of thinking. So here's the introduction to the article. Today, Apple Watch can detect dangers related to your heart, detect when you've experienced a dangerous fall or have been in a car crash and call for help. Yesterday, April 2nd, a new Apple patent was published that details a safety SOS feature related to swimmers in danger. Apple notes in their patent background that every year more than 3,500 people in the United States die from drowning. Keep in mind that is an underreported statistic because if you die in the hospital of morbidity or any other medical complications, that is not tracked as a drowning. That is a major problem with our drowning statistic collection in North America and around the world. It is also the case that we estimate 4 to 5 times the number of people who die actually do experience drowning as submersion, but it's non-fatal, and those complications are also not tracked. So the drowning statistics in North America could be at least 4 to 5 times higher than the people we know who die. The average person can hold their breath for about 30 seconds. Children, the length is shorter. This is a lot of conjecture. I think it would be very difficult to standardize this as a reliable standard. We stay away in our committee work from any sort of attempt to standardize physiology. So I'm going to skip over this. I don't think it's a good idea to rely on standards like this. Everybody is going to be different. Apple's invention covers a few future Apple Watch being used as a digital pool attendant. In some embodiments, a method comprises determining with at least one processor of a wearable device whether a user is swimming or not swimming based on sensor data. In accordance with the user not swimming, determining with at least one processor and based on that sensor data whether the user is showing irregular or irregular behavior while swimming, and in accordance with the user showing irregular behavior, sending an alert message to one or more devices. So this is positive to read. This is no different from the other technologies I'm familiar with in my committee work, where there needs to be a chain of events in the technology to set off an alarm or notification. So for example, with the hardware installed for residential drowning technology, it is not simply an entry alarm. There are certain conditions within the software and the technology that have to be met to cause a notification or alarm to be issued. Those settings are proprietary technology and design by each company, and then they can be further adjusted by a trained and reputable installer of that product to be more sensitive or less sensitive. So this is already really positive to read that Apple will have a sequence of conditions. It's not simply going to say, your watch is wet, let's send out an alarm. So then we have the marketing people saying this new Apple Watch could provide a cost-effective pool alarm system solution that can be deployed in every type of fresh water. I am very concerned about this broad scale statement. You're all of a sudden going to have people expecting their watch to save them when they're out boating, to save them when they're at the beach, to save them when they're at their backyard pool. I'm not opposed to this idea, but I think it's unrealistic at this stage to think that one product can do it all. Disclosed pool alarm system and method can be used as a standalone system, or it can be integrated with other pool alarm or drowning detection systems for public swimming pools, including camera surveillance-based systems. So the idea of integration is not bad, but I wonder how that can be customized. Can the commercial pool, turn that setting off? Probably not. If the user has that setting on, how will that work? Will the lifeguard hear a beeping? Will the lifeguard be expected to suddenly know what receiving technology is required? I don't think it's bad to say it could be integrated, but it's going to create a consumer expectation that every pool can somehow integrate this into their layers of protection with their lifeguards, and that's just unrealistic. If it is to purchase a receiving station or some sort of docking station to transmit those signals from the watch to the facility, that's just another opportunity for Apple to make money. Apple patent figure 1 below is a system overview of a pool safety monitoring system that uses wearable devices. In the example scenario shown, user 100 is swimming and wearing a smartwatch. The smartwatch includes a swimming analytics application that can determine limb coordination, swimming style, and various other metrics and other information that are good indicators of swimming. Perhaps the Apple Watch will require a period to learn the swimming of the wearer. So with a wearable device, you can set a standard pace, like walking length, by measuring your pace, or you can allow the watch to sense that for you. Perhaps with the Apple Watch, they will have the ability to learn the wearer's swimming technique. That's not a bad idea. That will increase accuracy. but I would argue that a non-swimmer, somebody who is at risk of drowning, will not enter the pool to cause their watch to learn their metrics or their biomechanics of swimming. So how is the system going to work if it doesn't have that baseline or that calibration data? In some embodiments, the swimming metrics and other information such as heart rate, blood oxygen levels are input into a machine learning model that has been trained to classify a swimmer showing irregular and irregular behavior when in the water. When a swimmer is in distress, such as a heart attack, the user's behavior becomes irregular. The irregular is described in reference to figure 2. A lot to unpack there. I've already said you can't standardize the physiological response to a medical emergency or swimming. So me as a 37-year-old swimming who's a little bit out of shape, my physiology, my body's response may be different from a child who's 8 years old, a senior who's 72 years old. It's going to depend on the type of swimming that I'm doing, the activity level, my cardiovascular fitness. It's very difficult to standardize. Certainly, we can learn from the free data of other users that send their biometrics to Apple, the same way Fitbit uses my biometrics to inform and train the artificial intelligence behind this hardware. But it's going to be, I just have a lot of questions about that. Let's look at figure 1 and 2 before we get further into the article. So figure 1 clearly shows a receiving device. So the man or the pool attendant or the woman, they're holding something. I would imagine it's an iPad. So pools or homeowners need to purchase an iPad and set it up as a receiving device. And so it is not just the watch that's going to work on its own. The watch is going to be part of an ecosystem of hardware and software that works together. How is that going to work for people who don't purchase those other products? A lot of questions I would have there. If I am not an Apple user, but I'm a lifeguard at a pool and we don't have an iPad, how is that swimmer who expects me as a lifeguard supervising them, they expect me to respond to their Apple device notification? We don't have the technology installed at our facility, nor should we be expected to. It's just a very confusing gray area. Figure 2 is, again, they're showing very competent swimmer. They're showing somebody here on the left. I believe they're engaged in butterfly or they're engaged in jumping off the bottom. There's some breaststroke legs happening with some breaststroke arm, some back crawl, some front crawl. This is definitely butterfly. And so without even commenting on the technology, I truly hope that Apple is engaging with people who understand that the active people who drown are not necessarily competent swimmers. That does not exclude competent swimmers, like people who are training for triathlons, masters swimmers, swim club kids. They also drown, athletes drown, but the very nature of this illustration for the patent of these competent swimming behaviors is very concerning if that is the basis by which they are measuring how they hope to achieve drowning prevention. These are just they're not realistic to drowning behaviors, which could be vertical, floating. Hopefully, this is the very preliminary stage of this investigation. The next part of this article, the irregular behavior is reflected in the swimming analytics metrics and other information such as heart rate or other vital signs in response to the machine learning model classifying the swimmer's behavior in the water. A wireless transceiver embedded on the smartwatch broadcasts a radio frequency message to nearby devices in the pool or on the pool deck, such as smartphones, tablet computers, smartwatches, laptop computers, or a monitoring and control station. The users of the nearby device are presented with the message on their respective displays through an audible alert, such as a beep, siren, ringtone, spoken alert, and or haptic feedback, such as a vibration, to get the attention of bystanders who can offer their assistance to the distressed swimmer or call for emergency first responders. So it would be one thing if this is vibration such as smartphones in Canada, if we have an Amber Alert or if there's some sort of environmental alert like a fire, an earthquake, everybody's phone goes off. We have a national broadcast system. Doesn't matter what brand of phone you have, what network provider you have, everybody receives that national alert. So if the idea that Apple has is that I am drowning and my watch broadcasts to any other nearby Apple device, such as an Apple iPad, such as an Apple smartwatch, such as an Apple desktop computer or Apple operating system, that is one thing to crowdsource other people to provide aid, but that is a whole other kettle of fish in terms of the potential risk and liability of a lay responder trying to save somebody who is drowning. And I also have concerns. I don't know enough about radio frequency to know, would this work with products outside of the Apple ecosystem? So PC, Android, older devices that don't have Bluetooth, that don't have wireless or Wi-Fi. There's so many layers here that rely on modern technology that the average commercial pool may not have. And it personally feels a little bit like the cult of Apple, where yes, Apple products are great. People feel very passionately about them, but not every person on planet Earth has an Apple product. And so although this is a worthwhile feature, you are relying on other devices in your lived environment, in your swimming environment, in your outdoor water safety environment to catch these signals. And that may not be appropriate statistically to the number of people who are needed to actually respond to this type of emergency or notice that it is happening. Here is figure 3. So there are multiple metrics that lead to specific conditions which lead to an alert. That is very important. There is not just one biometric that leads to an alert and false identification. There is a sequence based on learning, but how that learning is determined, where it comes from, how it might apply to people who are non-swimmers, who've never taken their device into water. You could also argue that, demographically, wealthy people have the opportunity to purchase an Apple Watch, to wear an Apple Watch. When we talk about demographics, many people don't have access to water safety, such as swimming lessons. They may come from poor or rural communities. That's not always the case, but poor people will not have Apple Watches. Poor people who don't know how to swim will not have Apple Watches to save them. And is there going to be enough machine learning from poor people or poor swimmers or people who don't know how to swim to give that data to Apple to train their AI, to train their biometrics? I don't know. I'm just speculating here. I'm trying to understand how this could work. Maybe they have it figured out and I'm completely in the wrong, but I think it's definitely some gaps in the nature of people's access to the product and in the nature of people who are not able to swim, who might experience a fall into deep water, who may experience fatal drowning. Apple's patent figure 2A above illustrates both what regular and irregular swimmer posture should and shouldn't be. A significant deviation from this reference posture can indicate irregular behavior. So I don't want to go too far down the track of, privilege and who knows how to swim and who doesn't. But speaking as somebody who's taught swimming lessons for many years to many different ages of people in many different communities, both urban and rural, Ontario and Alberta, both wealthy and not wealthy, not everybody can achieve these good drowning swimming techniques. And so it's unrealistic to rely on proper swimming technique as a metric for whether someone is drowning or not. As I mentioned earlier, the mere fact that these swimmers are wearing a bathing cap and goggles and a certain type of athletic swimwear is already a high bar that is not achievable by everybody in the population. For example, the relative position of the swimmer's legs, torso, head, and arms can indicate irregular behavior associated with a swimmer in distress or a swimmer who is unconscious. I would not be comfortable making that statement. There are many people I have seen lifeguarding public swim for thousands of hours over my 20-year career as a lifeguard. They are functionally self-taught swimmers. They are not at risk of drowning, but their strokes do not look nice. They do not look pretty. They are not biomechanically effective or efficient, but they work. And so it is very unrealistic to rely on the biomechanical position of a swimmer's body to inform whether they are drowning or not. Other positions can also be detected, including but not limited to a diving position, a standing in water, in addition to inertial sensors on the smartwatch. A heart rate sensor measures the swimmer's heart rate, which may suddenly elevate when the swimmer is in a panic, or their blood oxygen level may suddenly drop if the swimmer cannot breathe. I mean, concerns I have with this is your heart rate is also elevated when you jump into cold water, when you sit in hot water. There's certain temperature changes and certain environmental changes, exertion changes, cardiovascular capacity based on your own level of physical fitness, your size, your age. There's so many metric and data points here. Again, if Apple has a mechanism to deal with all of this successfully and effectively, great. But there's so many things thrown into this bucket, it is concerning to me. This discusses figure 3, which is the sequence of that thought process for the technology to send an alarm. And then for full details, it says review Apple's patent application. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to end this video here. To sum up everything we've talked about in this video, I do think that there is a need for a wearable device that can assist with water safety and drowning prevention. Drowning is a leading cause of death. I don't want to be a negative Nancy and say it can't be done. Technology is advancing in ways that we can't even comprehend in 2024 versus 2020 or 2014. Apple is a company that has shown tremendous innovation over its lifetime. If there is a company that can do it, maybe Apple is the company to do it with infinite financial resources, the time that is required to do this properly. I just have very real concerns at this stage about the false sense of security this is going to create for the average user, the accessibility of this type of product in terms of it being only available to a wealthy part of the population, as well as the machine learning that is going to be possible based on certain demographics or certain people wearing these types of watches, relying on that learning to inform the system. And then I truly hope that they get more pool people involved in this project, because the data that's shown in the limited, I'll bet very limited, captures from the patent filing. This is not the full patent filing, but the article with the diagrams that we've seen is very limited in its understanding of how people drown, how people swim. It casts too wide of a net, in my opinion, trying to be all things to all people, all swimmers in all pool environments, all ages. I would much rather see, if the beta mode is children in certain types of outdoor pools, and then expand over subsequent, years, subsequent updates, I think that's more appropriate. I think the scope is too broad. I think the goal is noble. I think there is a lot that can be done to improve how we tell if somebody is drowning in environments that are not lifeguarded. But as I've mentioned in this video, this patent assumes a lot of things that are not, in my opinion, as a water safety professional, as a pool operator, as somebody who works in the pool industry, that are not factually accurate to the drowning process or to people's experience drowning or swimming. And it really would be a shame to see Apple work on developing this type of product or software update without an accurate understanding of what really happens in the drowning process, who drowns, where do they drown, when is it fatal, when is it non-fatal. There's just so much that we'll have to wait and see as this product is developed. Thanks so much if you made it to the end of this very long video. I really appreciate you being here. Please let me know in the video comments below if you agree with any of my opinions that I shared in this video. All of these are my personal opinions, Katie Crysdale, on the basis of the information available today. I think it is a great innovation in our industry if it ends up being successful, but I have a lot of caveats to that, and we'll have to see what Apple does with this product. If it even develops, if it even occurs, if it's even offered, a patent filing is no guarantee that it's going to happen. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you again in the next video.